So this session is obviously, as you know, it's really what's involved in assurance review and how you can be prepared. So I just want to introduce myself first of all. So I'm Helen Boone. I'm one of the Post-16 insurance managers, and I work in the Post-16 insurance team, obviously. We fall within what we call the Funding and Financial Oversight Directorate, which basically oversees £76 billion worth of public funding, and we have about circa 20,000 providers. Obviously, we don't get to audit all of those providers. You'll get to hear about how we choose which ones we do audit. Obviously, there's quite a lot there. So basically, we're there to ensure funding is claimed and used correctly, based on the ILR data and DfE rules. Such. We're not a huge team, I have to say. We're not massive. It's not really that. There's about 3 managers and about 15, 20 auditors. That's about it, really. So, right. So the objectives for today, I'm just going to go through different aspects with you. Now, obviously, we'll cover those off as we go through each of those. So, first of all, really just to say what we're responsible for. So we have to obviously deliver this annual assurance program, which obviously gives assurance that funds are being used for the purposes intended. So to do that, we perform a program of funding audits, looking at funding claims basically. And this covers the samples of different types of providers. So we cover obviously colleges, and we cover what we call existing and new ITPs. So some providers who are new, they fall into a different sample, but existing ones as well. Yeah. Then obviously employed providers and obviously HEIs as well. So we do the universities as part of that. So we focus in on the ILR. So it's the ILR data is what's been used to do these audits and to ensure funds are being used for the purposes intended. We're accountable to NAO, so the National Audit Office. The National Audit Office will come and look at what we do and make sure that we've done enough, or we can give enough assurance that funds have been used. So they come and audit us on an annual basis. So we have to ensure we've done enough work to give them that assurance. So it kind of has a very similar pattern every year how our audits occur. So for the ITPs and the HEIs, it normally starts in sort of spring, early summertime. We have a random sample, so that sample is selected by our statisticians. It is purely random. We have to prove that it's random because NEO will not accept our findings if it's not seen as not being random. So it's really important that we do follow that process. But we also have a separate sample, random again, for what we call new apprenticeship providers. So these ones who have not been operating for very long, they've been in the last couple of years, they're fairly new. We recognise these as being higher risk, mainly because apprenticeship funding, as you all know, and the rules, as you all know, are quite complex. And when you're not used to that and you're starting off as a new provider, it can be quite daunting, and you can quite easily get things wrong. So they're seen as high risk, but we do some other types of audits, which I'll talk about later, which we do try to help in that respect. But colleges also, that's a random as well, obviously, and we do those normally. Those are all happening now. So basically, they've been started at the end of August, go through September into October. They have to be done before ILR close. We have to do a reconciliation as part of this work, so they're normally done then. And then we do a risk sample. And that's normally done in December, January, February, and I will talk a bit more about that later. So what do we audit? Well, so if we're going to audit a provider, so when we've selected our providers that we are auditing, we'll have a look and see what type of funding they are receiving. So if it is if they are getting the Adult Skills Fund and some maybe some AUB still, because we're still looking at legacy learners. Apprenticeships we look at as well, advanced learner loans and loans bursary, and then the 16 to 19. And then we may also look at student support, so that's the bursary funding element. So if a provider is receiving all of those types of funding, it may well be that we'll look at all of those types of funding, but not necessarily in every single case. But in the main, we definitely will look at 16 to 19 apprenticeships and adult skills fund if they're getting it. The loans element and student support are not always done. There's sometimes we do a smaller amount of that, so we don't necessarily do it on every audit. We also do some targeted work on the earnings adjustment statement, that is the EAS, and the final claim. So we might look at claims that are put through that as well, but that's not part of our main program. It is ad hoc. So the random sample, like I said, we have to select this and we have to make sure it is random. And the reason for that is because any errors that we find from that, we extrapolate that or we across the rest of the population of providers. So when National Audit Office come in, we say, or we found all these errors are from our random sample, and then that figure is then extrapolated across the rest. And so they look at our workings for this and make sure they're happy with that. We take our random sample from the listing of allocations, so for that funding year. So as I say, we have to make sure it generates a reasonable sample of learners. So we have to make sure we've done enough, like apprenticeship learners, or done enough ASF learners to get some assurance. And like I said, for the new apprenticeships ones, these are ones that were new to delivery in the last 2 academic years that we select. For the risk, this risk samples, so it's not random, obviously, we do select these. So what we use is we have like a methodology, and we look at not necessarily providers who are on the naughty step, should I say, ones who are giving some cause for concern. It could be what those, or it could also just be as simple as a very large provider who's not been audited for a very long time. Because our random sample, as I said, if we might say do 100 providers, but if we've got 20,000, some providers never get picked. Could go on for years and years and they'll never get picked. So sometimes we look at it in that respect, thinking, oh, here we've got a very high value provider who's not had an audit for a very, very long time, and actually it's probably time for us to go in. So it's not necessarily means that anything's wrong. It just could be that, or it could be that there is some concerns that have been raised by your contract managers, your case managers that you deal with. We also sometimes pick up audits from the investigations team who have triaged it and decided it's not worthy of an investigation. So instead it's gone to us for an audit. So it's a different mixed bag of stuff there. And again, we have a separate risk sample for apprenticeship providers for new ones as well. So they're done separately again. We also do something what we call control visits. So these are really new providers, and they're in that not had 2 full academic years, but they're really, really new. And again, we pick a random sample, but the object of these is not necessarily to go out and find errors, it's to go out and almost give a health check, making sure that they're on the right path, because what we don't want is for them to go along for several years doing the wrong thing, and then we come out and audit them 4 years later down the line and find that they've just not been compliant for all these years because they've misunderstood or just not done something right, and then it has huge financial implications. Unfortunately, we can't do that with every new provider. So we have to select a random sample and do this. Now we use what is called a controls questionnaire as part of this. So this is digging deeper into their systems and controls, the processes they're putting in place, making sure they are going to be compliant with the rules. And then we get them to complete that, and then we review that, and then we also do some learner level testing as well. Now that questionnaire is available on .gov.uk for anybody to use. So if you wanted to go away and do your own health check and have a look and make sure I've got all the right systems and controls in place, you can use that. And I'll talk about that a bit later, what's on gov.uk. And then when we, at the outcome of that visit is that we would obviously give you any recommendations if we think you need to improve, you're doing things wrong, get you to go away and put it right and improve going forward. Um, so we do those, but obviously we would love to be able to do it for all of them, but just don't have the capacity. Now, we also use some audit firms. So if you have an audit, you might not necessarily have one from our own in-house team. It may be an audit firm, because we just don't have enough capacity to do all audits, and especially this time of year when we're doing a lot of college audits, because they're all compacted in the autumn time, sort of like that August, September, October time. We just don't have enough people to be able to go out and do all of the colleges, for example. So we use audit firms, and these audit firms, they had to tender, they had to apply, and so these are the five that we use. So you might get contacted by one of these to do, to come and do an audit. They follow our methodologies. They do exactly the same as what we would do in-house. So it won't be any different you having a firm as opposed to an in-house auditor to come out. It will be exactly the same because it's exactly the same methodology. And they've all got a lot of experience. So, they do know what they're doing, sort of thing. So I'm just going to talk with you through the whole what the audit process is, and the steps that we have to go through, and some sort of really important messages in here. So like I said to you before, we will test all your funding streams. So if you've got all of these, then we are likely to do them all or most of them. We do also test subcontracting, and I will talk a bit more about subcontracting. There's a slide on this, but if your organisation has gone through the subcontracting standard, had to go through that because you've got over 100k, then we won't come and look at your subcontracting as such. It's only those that have gone through that. And as I said, we sometimes will do the financial support, which is the bursary work as well. So we would contact the provider. Now, we don't normally give more than 4 weeks notice, but sometimes we do give a bit more, and that's the ones with the firms. So sometimes we have to give a bit more notice on those, but in the main, it's no more than 4 weeks notice. And then what will happen is you'll hear from the auditor, and you'll be given the opportunity to discuss the audit itself. So the auditor will contact you and talk you through what's going to happen at an audit. So and then also agree a start date with you. So start date of the field work, that is. Once that's done, then we'll issue a confirmation letter. We'll also copy in your account manager, whatever they're called, account managers or case managers or whatever. So they're aware that this audit is being undertaken. And we'll also send you an internal controls questionnaire for you to complete. So that there is two control questionnaires, and they're both on gov.uk, so you can see them both. One is just apprenticeships. The other one covers all the funding streams. So if we have a provider that's got all funding streams, then we send that one off for them to fill in and for that to be reviewed. That just gives us some insight into your systems and controls and processes. And sometimes when we find things have gone wrong, we can look back on that and say, well, and talk with the provider, obviously, as well. What is your process here? How has this gone wrong? What can we do to put this right, as such? So it is a really useful questionnaire for us, and I think hopefully for the provider, who can also perhaps self-reflect on it and make sure that they are doing things right. Now I just want to make a plug for this PDSATs. Now I hope you've all heard of PDSATs, but you may not have. So PSAT, which stands for Provider Data Self-Assessment Tool. Um, it's something that works with your ILR. You put your ILR through it, and it will produce a series of reports to test the integrity of the ILR. So it will highlight some potential issues, and it produces these reports, which could have anomalies, etc., which may need some further work on. Now, we, as part of our planning, all auditors, whether audit firms or us, will run those PDSATs, those reports, and we'll go through each and every single one of them. Now, if you've got 4 funding streams, or if you were provided with 4 funding streams, that can be quite a lot of reports, actually. I can't remember what the total is at the minute, but we're probably talking about something like 80 off the top of my head. But if it's just 1 funding stream, obviously is less. But obviously we do go through all the ones that got learners on them. They're not all means every single report means something is wrong. There are some reports which are just listing reports, or just, nothing serious as such, but some actually are potential funding errors. Now we report our findings. So we do this review and then we send you, the provider, the review that we've done. And then we may have some additional questions to ask you to say, can you confirm, what's going on here? What have you checked these learners, whatever. And then sometimes we might do some extra samples from these. So you will have your main sample, but you may also get some additional samples from the PDSAT work. But if you haven't used these, please do. We obviously always recommend that you do use them to make sure your ILR is correct. And there is a link in these slides to the PDSAT webpage, so have a look at that. So when we're doing our running, the PDSATs also produces our sample. So it also produces the learner sample, that is. So these have to be random as well. Always have to be random. So we select it from the ILR and we use this PDSAT tool, and then we select up to however samples we need. So for each funding stream, it will be a sample of 30 learners on each. So for your apprenticeship sample, for example, it will be 30 learners. They are selected randomly. This also produces our working papers. So all the working papers are, everyone's using the same set of working papers. You yourself, if you use PDSAT, you can do exactly the same, and you can produce working papers if you want to do your own self-audit. It's not just restricted to auditors, it is there for everybody to use. Now, when we've done that, we will send you the samples to the provider. It's not normally more than 2 weeks in advance of the field work. So you'll get those learners, and then you'll be expected to go away and find the evidence that we need to be able to test those learners. And you'll get told what it is we need by the auditor. You'll get an idea, but equally you'll get to see the types of things that we are testing. Now, sometimes our audits are done on site and sometimes they're done remotely. We encourage our auditors to go out on site. Now that obviously the COVID restrictions are gone and everything, obviously it was all remote then, but now that we've kind of returned to normal, we do encourage auditors to go on site because we feel the audit goes more smoothly and quicker if it's done on site, because you're constantly dealing with queries or talking to the provider, trying to make sure you've got an understanding of what you're looking at and you can tick off the tests, basically. However, that's not always possible, mainly due to the fact that some providers don't have the premises necessarily to accommodate us, or our auditors, although they are spread out around the country, they're not necessarily always in the right place or living. So sometimes it's a case of having to give an audit down south to an auditor who's based up north, because we just don't have the enough people to be able to give them where the geography is right for them, if you know what I mean. So sometimes it is done remotely like that. And sometimes some providers really do not want an auditor on site, and we do respect that. But we do prefer to do on site if we can. So when we're out doing the audit either remotely or on site. The fieldwork stage, so that consists of us testing that main sample, so that 30 sample of learners, as well as any PDSAP follow-up work. Now that can take about 1 to 2 weeks. It just really depends on how many samples we've got to look at. If it's just one sample and maybe it's a bit of PDSAP work, we could easily do that in a week. But sometimes it does go on longer. Like I said to you, we use working papers for each funding stream. So that's to make sure basically you're compliant with the funding rules. Those questions are related more to funding, so where funding errors could occur. Obviously, that's where what we're focusing on as such. Now, we do give ongoing feedback throughout the audit, so you would get usually daily, or sometimes immediately. If we find an error or we find something we need to talk to you about, then we'll do it straight away. But sometimes that's the end of the day, so whatever works best for the audit. Now, when we do a test and we find something that we need to query with the provider, we tick no to that test, and those no's all go through to an Excel spreadsheet called a B3. Can be a big spreadsheet if there's lots of queries. It doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to be errors. It's just the queries that we're leaving with you at the end of an audit, and that the provider would then need to respond to each of those queries and may have to submit further evidence, and that would be done. This might not be done on the fieldwork stage. It might be done after the fieldwork has done, so it's ongoing even after we've been out as such, but it gives you the provider the opportunity to respond. And where we do find an error, then that unfortunately that means further work has to be carried out. So if, for example, we find an error, and I always use, I think, a withdrawal because it's quite a straightforward error. So you've put an end date for a learner as, say, June, but actually learner hasn't done any learning since February. So those months between February and June are in error. So we know that that's a definite error. That's not going to go away. There's nothing extra you're going to give us that's going to change that. We will then need to know how many other errors you've got on your withdrawals. So we'll say to you, there needs to be 100% check done. So this 100% check will be done by the provider. It's not done by us. So, but we will tell you which learners you will need to select or you'll need to test. So what we call it's called ring fencing. So we ring fence them down. So in my example of withdrawals, we will ring fence down all of your withdrawals in your population for that ILR that we're auditing, and we'll say, please, can you go away now and check all of your withdrawals? Here's the list, and tell us what you find. So the provider will then go away and do that work. Now, if there's several different types of errors, that can be quite a lot of work, several different types of 100% checks. Equally, if an error is such that we can't ring fence it down, and it could be, so say like, for example, eligibility. So we found an error on eligibility. It might apply to all learners. It might be really difficult to ring fence down to a lower cohort of learners. So it might be that you've actually got to go away and look at every single one of your learners. So I've got some where there's been 1,000 or more. They've had to go through and check. So it's just be prepared for that. And hopefully, though, if you can clear the error that's in the sample, then obviously that won't result in 100% check. That's even better, but unfortunately, it's not always happened. So we understand that this could take you a bit of time to do, and some audits do drag on for several weeks because you're having to do this work. And then what happens after that, when you've done it, we look at your results and then we go away and we retest some of it. So we retest a sample of it. And if we agree with your findings in that sample, then we'll say, right, we think the rest of it is okay because we've agreed that. So we have to then do those retests. But if we find anything is wrong from our retests, then you may have to go away and do the 100% again. So it can be a very long and labour intensive process, this. So So just to warn you, but hopefully, your audits won't have any errors. At the end of all that, so the end of all the sample testing that we've done, at the end of all the 100%, if there was any end of the PDSAT review and testing, we'll have a formal closure meeting with you. So we'll talk through all of the findings, and we'll also give you an action plan, which will include our findings and our recommendations on that. So we would need you to respond to that action plan on what you're going to do to put things right in your processes, etc. If we do find errors, and they can be corrected through the ILR, because we're still like in current year, for example, we will get you to do those as soon as possible, and then we'll check that you've done it. But if there are errors that can't be corrected because they're outside of the current year, then they will normally offset those. But just one other thing to mention as well on those 100% checks, if, for example, it is an eligibility issue, say, for example, and you find that your learner was ineligible, you've looked at it and thinking, oh yeah, crikey, we've done this one, and all funds are therefore have been claimed in error, then we'll also claw back all your prior year funding that you've had for that learner. So sometimes, even on things like start dates or end dates, you can sometimes cross it, you go back a year. So those errors we can't necessarily do date adjustments on, but we will offset it. So we also need to work all of that out as well on your prior year. So yeah, finding errors is a long and long process, because it's not just finding them, it's then trying to work out what the errors are on them. We haven't got a wizzy tool to do that, not yet. We're trying to build one, but so at the end of the audit, obviously you get a report, and that will obviously have all your findings and recommendations and your summary of it. There'll be nothing in there that's of any surprise. Everything would have already been spoken to you about and discussed and everything. And then once that report is issued, then we arrange for the recovery to happen. So if we have to offset, then we send a form through to your payments team, who offset it against your future payments. So that's either done in one lump or it's done over a period of time. But you have the opportunity to agree this. We won't just take it without saying anything. There's lots of stages to go through, which you're involved in, before we ever take that money back. We need your agreement to the funding errors, and also the agreement to how it's repaid. Okay. So like I said, subcontracting. So when we do any subcontracting tests, we've got some testing papers, but it's very high level. So we look at your subcontracting declaration. We also, on those PDSAT reports I've mentioned, there is a list and report for subcontracting, which details all your learners and which subcontractors that you're using. So have the UK PRN numbers for those against it. So we'll have a look at your subcontracts, the actual contracts that you've got in place, to make sure it covers all the right terms and conditions that should be in there. And then also we'll just make sure that as well, that there's no non-declared subcontractor. And so we often find when we do an audit that you're using a provider, maybe using a subcontractor which they've not declared. So obviously we would need to pick that up with you and deal with that. It's really, really important. And for some reason at the moment, we seem to have a high number of these cases whereby providers are using sort of self-employed tutors or freelancers, etc., to deliver some of the training and not declare them as a subcontractor. You should be declaring anybody you have a contract with for services they're delivering. You should be declaring those as subcontracting. And they should also be on APAR unless you've gone through, so that they should be registered, basically, registered providers. Unless you've gone through the subcontracting standard, then you can use non-APAR subcontractors, but you should always declare them and they should be on APAR. If you've ever got any queries that whether or not who you're using is subcontracting or not, then just please raise it with your account manager, and we can look at those cases. Because rather you shout it up now than find an audit. Because we find an audit that you've been using subcontractors and you've not declared it's a breach of contract, and it could potentially mean that we claw back funding. So it's really, really important. We also look to see that your delivery that you're doing is of substance. Now, the substance rule has always been a bit contentious. We don't define what is seen as substance, but we do expect what you're delivering to be significant as opposed to what your subcontractor is delivering. Again, it's looking at each on a case by case basis, but again, we've been having cases though where providers we're using subcontractors who are doing all of the delivery, which unfortunately is not allowable. So again, that could result in a funding error. And as I said to you, we also check for any non-declared subcontractors. So it's just, yeah, look at the rules for this and make sure you're complying if you are using anybody that's not a PAYE employee. Okay, so I just was going to go through some common findings with you. Now, on the gov.uk page, and I will take you onto that in a little while, this document is on there. It's called Common Findings from Assurance Work on Post-16 Education Providers. So each year after we finish our audits, when we get to year end, and NEO have finished their work on us and audited us. So we're now getting around to that point in time. We will collate all of the errors that have occurred, and we'll look at the ones that are most commonly coming up on our audit. So it's all collected into a big spreadsheet, and we have a look. So we put our common findings into this document to let you know. Now, obviously, the big one is off the job training, which obviously causes us a lot of errors. And basically that is, just finding that the plan of hours is wrong, if it's been calculated incorrectly. So then what happens is, because it's been calculated incorrectly, sometimes they don't mean the minimum of that. So it's really important that it's calculated right. We do find there's a mismatch. So sometimes the hours of the off-the-job hours, how it's detailed in the agreement and the training plan, the ILR is all different, not consistent, and there's no details of training activities or how it's going to be delivered. Sometimes we find ineligible activities have been counted as off-the-job training, and quite often there's little or insufficient records to prove that 20% off-the-job completion. So it's really, really important that the evidence that you keep shows that they have met the requirements for off the job. And then we also find it's done outside working hours, and then provider gets all the way through to completion, and we find that they've not met the off the job. And because it is a legal requirement and is absolutely essential, because our funding, what we pay you is for off the job. It's not for anything else. It's for those off the job hours. Basically, we're paying you for off the job. So if you haven't done it, then basically the apprenticeship is deemed ineligible, and we can claw back all your funding for those learners that you've not got. So it's really, really, really important that you get this bit right. Okay, I can't emphasize that enough, the amount we've clawed back from providers. And it's not just the completion payment we claw back all of it if you've not met that. That's the biggie. The other one is the apprenticeship agreement and training plans. So we do find that sometimes they're not there, or they're incomplete. They they don't meet all the criteria that we set out in the funding rules. There are templates you can use. Well, they're not signed. There's inconsistencies between them, between that, the training plan, the ILR. They're not updated when there's change of circumstances or after breaks in learning. Or there's like weak electronic signatures. So the signatures were no, what we call irrefutable. I think is the word. I can't remember what it says now in the rules, but something like that. So basically, nobody could have just done something like copied and pasted it in as such. There's a proper secure system that would that shows that was actually signed as such electronically. If there is no apprenticeship agreement, then it's an ineligible apprenticeship, basically. And that again means all your funds are at risk. So we could claw back all your money. Now, we do allow you to go and get the apprenticeship agreement signed retrospectively. So often that takes away that error, because the provider's been able to go and get it signed retrospectively. But unfortunately, sometimes by the learners in the ILR have completed and gone and disappeared off the face of the earth, and even the employers aren't interested in helping. You can't get them done retrospectively, in which case then, unfortunately, those funds are at risk. So it's really, really important that those are there. Start and end dates, obviously very common across really all fund streams, but so if you're here for apprenticeships, obviously we need to see that there is evidence of learning activity from the start date that you've put in the ILR. So inductions sometimes is used as a start date, but if there's no actual learning activity happen as part of that induction, then you can't use it. So just be really careful. It would only for start dates, if the learner's gone on to complete and your start date was wrong, we wouldn't necessarily count that as a funding error because you would have been entitled to all the money if they've gone on to complete anyway. If your learner's withdrew from the program and your start date was much later than what you put in the ILR, then obviously that will mean there's a funding error. End dates as well as another one. I know, like the example I gave earlier with the withdrawal date is often we do find it is wrong. So it's been incorrectly recorded. It doesn't match the last day of learning. So when we look at your underlying records, then it's often that we can't, confirm that is your end date. So that could well result in a funding error. So like I said, the incorrect start dates for withdrawals, are likely to be the ones we get errors on. And the same again for the end dates. So we will seek recovery, and we'll obviously get you to 100% check. So on those that we do find in the sample. So knowledge skills and behaviours. So we do find lack of evidence of the appropriate assessment to confirm that their knowledge skills and behaviours prior to commencing the apprenticeship. So it's really important that your assessment outcomes show what you've actually done, what you've assessed, and why you've come to the judgments that you have done. But sometimes where we do find that there is prior learning, but there's no reduction, and then there's no justification why there's no reduction, then obviously that can mean that we'll just say, well, we'll have some funding back, So it's really, as I just say, just make sure that whatever you do on the assessment side, that you can justify whatever. Now we're not qualification experts, so when we see somebody who's may have done, say somebody's doing bricklaying and they may have done some bricklaying before, and now come on to do another bricklaying course. It's not necessarily that, we haven't got the knowledge to know what's been matched across from the two, what prior learning would actually reduce down on the knowledge, skills and behaviours, or reduce down the price, and etc. We do rely on you, but we do rely on you to tell us, oh yeah, we've looked at this and we've come to this judgment because of this. And if we can see that, and we feel, yeah, this has been properly looked at, then we'll accept it. You know, we're not ones to turn around and say, actually, we think that should have been a 10% reduction, not a 5%. We haven't got the knowledge to do that. So it's just really important that you do properly document that, what you've done on that. Okay, so learning activities. So obviously we do look for your learning activity on what, you know, that the learner is learning as they should be throughout the program. So if they, I mean, if they're not doing an activity, then and there is a, you know, potential break in learning that's been properly recorded as such. So sometimes when breaks in learning are used, there's little evidence to confirm why or when the last date of learning activity happened, or you know when they started, and then sometimes they are still on a break in learning like a year later, and you're thinking, well, what are you doing with this learner? You know, what's happening? So it's just really important that you have all the evidence for learning activity and breaks in learning that's appropriate. So otherwise, if not, it could result in a funding error. So so that is just some of the common findings. The main ones probably out of for apprenticeships. So now, like I said to you, you can go away and read all of these yourself. The document is called Common Findings. I'm just going to click on this and hopefully this will work from here. Yes, it does. This is our page on gov.uk. So DfE assurance work on post-16. So in here, there's several documents which hopefully you'll find to be helpful. So there's a post-16 assurance review guide. So basically what that's telling you, there's also a step-by-step process one, because we obviously have to comply and produce what we call an accessible document. But that will take you through the whole audit process, basically. You'll see in that what would happen at an audit if you were to have an audit. So basically it gives you all of the steps that I've just gone through with you today. I think there's several of those because we had to do it different types to meet you know, the accessibility rules. Now this one is really good. So the evidence requirements for apprenticeship funding. Now this is taking you through, it's not like the rules, obviously you've got the rules there as well, but it's actually taking you through each of the elements that we look at an audit, and the things that you need to be thinking about and having in place, and the types of things that we'll ask you for. I think this one is really, really, we hope it's really useful for providers to make sure they have the correct evidence. Now, obviously, most of your evidence is naturally occurring as part of your processes. There's no set evidence as such, but it's there to help you think about what you should have in place. So please do look at that and make sure that you are complying against each of the elements of the funding rules. But this is actually in line with what we test. So it won't do everything because not everything results in a funding error, but most of it is in there. So there's a process flow there, and there's a step by step, you know, there's two different sorts of documents there, whatever you feel is more useful for you, but they're going through the same things basically. I spoke to you about the control questionnaires. They're both here. So the apprenticeship one is the one that's just covers apprenticeships, and then the internal one covers all the funding streams. So they're both there, both that, you know, for you to use and ensure you're compliant. And then the common findings is here. So both of the last year's one. Now, I know it's 23 to 24. It's always backwards. We're never going to be like up to date. So at the moment, we're pulling together data, like I said, for our 24-25 assurance. So our assurance year goes up to the end of March. So it's all those audits up to March 25. Hopefully that will be out for Christmas. So that'll go up there. But in the main, the issues don't change as such. The main issues that we find, maybe the rules change a little bit behind those, but obviously the main issues are still there. So, but do have a look, and the previous one is there as well. So All of those are on this site, so please do look at that. And I've got to try and find out how to get back to my presentation now. Hang on. There we are. Okay, so they're all on there. So that's the link to it there. And as I said to you before, I put the link to the PDSAT guidance. So if you want to have a look at that, if you're not using it, please do consider using them as such. They're all there. That's it then. Any questions? So whistle top stop tour through audit, but yeah, I hope you found that useful. But if anybody's got any questions, I think those questions that came through beforehand, I hopefully that has answered those. I think is there any something in the chat?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, and there's a couple in the chat there if you want to have a look through those. Thanks.
All right, so we have an apprenticeship contract and an adult skills fund contract. However, ASF is funded via GLA. If we were selected to do an audit, will you do both together? No, is the answer to that. So the combined authorities are responsible for doing their own audits. We don't do audits on their behalf at all. We do try and try not to do them at the same time. So I shared the audit plan with them so that they can see who we're going to audit, so they can avoid, if possible, you having two audits around the same time. But no, they will do them themselves. Is the planning meeting online or in person? It's online. So it's usually we do it through Teams or Zoom, whatever suits you. It's done like that. Trying to think I mean, if you wanted it in person, you could ask for that. By all means. Oh, you've put the PDSAT guidance there. Oh yeah. Oh, I think I've just flicked off the presentation then. Hang on. That's all right, it's just come off that. I'll just, yeah. The PDC, yeah, the PDSAT tool is often down technical issues. Is this ongoing to improve to enable us? Yeah, it is. Obviously, we recognise that the PDSAT tool is often down. KPMG, who are our supplier for this, we have meetings with them every week, and we're trying to resolve these issues as quickly as possible and apologise for that. Hopefully things will improve. We go through patches where it's really great and then it goes wrong again. And obviously, as soon as it goes wrong, it's priority to get it put right. If a learner is selected in the sum, can you see these? Should I put these up on screen? Can you see? Oh, you can see them in the chat yourself. Yeah. So if a learner is selected in sample, and for example, the test is relating to eligibility or achievement, we'll be told what the auditor is testing. Yeah, I mean, by all means, the auditors can share with you the testing papers if you want to see those. As I said to you, you can access them yourself. You can see. Also in this document, pretty sure it's in one of these. Actual testing questions are, no, was it in that one? It might actually be in that one. I'll find out. But there's one of these documents has actually got kind of the questions that we ask. But you do have it, but you can ask to see them. But don't hide it. We're very transparent. So, by all means, as part of the planning meeting, if you want to know what we're testing, the auditor can share with you the tests. Then if we are told, will the evidence we provide upload just need to relate to what the audit test is? Well, basically we audit the whole learner journey at that point in time. So if they're at completion stage, we'll test everything. So we're testing their eligibility and their journey through. So we're looking at learning activity, looking at off the job, and then looking at your completion. So it'd be the whole learning journey. So if they've only just started, obviously it'll only be the start and whatever has happened up to that point. So yes. So not all tests will apply for every single learner because it all depends on what stage they're at. But so the auditor will be checking everything they can check at the point of audit. Yeah. So hang on, my mouse is not I don't know. What happens if the auditor identifies an error correctly, but the error does not have any impact on the funding we have claimed? Well, that would just be a data, what we call a data error, I assume. Um, then obviously there's no funding. We won't put there's no funding error to go in the report, but we will probably just give you a finding and recommendation for any data errors, if that's what that's meant there. If we co-deliver with a freelancer, with this count as subcontracting? Yes, if that freelancer is paid, so there is a contract or some sort of agreement for for them to provide services and you're paying them, so it might be on an invoice or whatever. Yes, very much potentially that would be subcontractor. So as I said to you, if you've got any that you're not sure about, we can look at them. It's not always subcontracting. We're not going to say it's always, but I think they have to be looked up properly and understand the proper relationship. So please do pick this up with your account manager, because I'd rather you did it now than it's found at audit. Is this the only if we are using funding to pay them? Yeah. So if you're not paying them, then no, it's not subcontracting. No. Yeah. Oh, you've put the common findings. Will there be any changes to the testing on the back of the apprenticeship reforms? Yes, obviously. So we're always auditing behind. So at the moment we're auditing, where are we now? We're auditing 24, 25 still. So whatever year your apprentice started in is whatever year we look at the rules. So whatever was in place at that time. So if your apprentice started 3 years ago, then we look at the rules for 3 years ago. So we don't say, oh, the rules have changed this year. No, you should, because obviously that wouldn't necessarily apply to that learner then. But yes, we're looking at this very moment in time, we are looking at our working papers for the 25, 26 rules ready for our audits next year. So yeah. So how strict? Oh yeah. So if it's a day, I can't remember if I think it says it in the rules that if it's where it matters is when it's crossed an OPP day. Okay. Um, so if, for example, your learner, you put in a start date of the first week of a month, and actually they started like middle of that month, that's not going to matter too much because they won't be funding it. But if they started like a month later, then it's crossed an OPP, non-program payment date. So it may well mean there's an error. But obviously, they might not pick up one day, but if it was just a short period of time, like I just said, just make sure you get it right. Just be what we call a management letter point. You've just touched on if error trends have changed, have they? Not, I mean, really, it's the same big things keep coming up each time. So they haven't really changed. And we work with policy very closely when they're pulling the funding rules together to say, look, you perhaps need to look at this rule again because we're getting lots of errors. Maybe that needs more clarification or it needs tweaking slightly, and we do try to do that. But unfortunately, the same ones still keep coming up. So you've got if a learner's off the job has slipped significantly, would you expect that to be replanned? Yes. And plans and agreements signed. Yeah, we would expect you to be replanning it if it's dropping. Now, with off the job, if we find that, where I said before, where we find if you've calculated it incorrectly, but the learner's still in learning, and we find that it is slipping, we would just say to you, go away and put this right. It would what we call a measurement let point. The only time off the job becomes a funding error is when you've got to completion stage. So because then nothing could change. You can't go away and say to the learner, right, you need to make up 100 hours because we didn't quite meet the off the job, hours because it's too late then. They've gone through completion. But when they're still in learning and there's still an opportunity for them to catch up and or you were to recalculate or whatever, then that's just a management letter point. Yeah. Um, Can you clarify that as an employed provider, we have our own training centre and assume that off the job is anything carried out within a classroom environment, not on site? So on site, you mean at the workplace, I'm assuming. Um, so some of the job can be in the workplace if you're practicing something, you've learned something new and you're still learning that, but not obviously most of it would be outside of the workplace. So yeah, but you just need to look at what is counted as off the job. There's a whole off the job guidance, which is really good, which goes into a lot of detail on what can and can't count. Will you be auditing year or previous year as well? So we audit at the moment, as I said, we're doing 24-25 funding at the moment. Our risk audits, which will start in November, probably will be still doing 24-25, even though we're in 25-26 funding year. So yes, we do. And if we find anything significant, really significant, I mean, like, we've gone out to you and we found a lot wrong. Yeah, oh, your offer job is wrong, for example, then we might say to you, right, well, you've obviously not been doing it right for the last 4 years that you've been receiving funds from us. So we're actually going to go back and do some prior year work on your prior years. So, but those cases are few and far between, thankfully. But yeah, our apprentices must complete pediatric first aid to enter Gateway. We are a nursery group now. To pay from nursery funds. I think if you're it's paid from the nursery funds, is this okay? No, because you're still, no, it doesn't matter where the fund is from. It's the fact that you've actually paying them for services. It could well be subcontracting, but again, you need to check with your account manager on that pediatric one. We on apprenticeship and program keep comprehensive training records. Yeah, that one on the training plan, I'm not sure. I think without seeing a live example of that, you might need to just pick it up. It sounds like it should be okay. Sounds like it should be okay. But you might just want to just check with your account manager. If it's just no, I think it's more the subcontracting really applies more for the delivery and on program assessment. So if that IQA one, it doesn't sound like that is that. I mean, I might be wrong. So in which case, that's not subcontracting. I've been told by our provider that if apps funds not being used, we do not need to. No, sorry, that's wrong. Then it's just the fact that you're paying them. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, that you're paying for a service, it's subcontracting. Is every single off the job record for a learner looked at by the auditor? They would look at all mentoring records for a learner. They would look at, yeah, they would look at all your off the job records for however long they've been on program. Yeah, so if they've been on for 3 years, we'd look at 3 years worth, yes. If, because we need to verify that they have met the off the job rule. And sometimes as well, the evidence is not perfect. So we do offer you the opportunity to go away and find alternative evidence. We always explore everything we possibly can to get rid of that error before it's ever counted. So sometimes we do look at other stuff. It could be other types of records, but they back up that off the job has happened, All right, so what's that? PFA provider worry be on? That's the issue. Oh, so they won't be on. You mean they won't be on? Oh, if they're not on the APAR, then you shouldn't be using them as such. But I think you need to pick it up and get somebody to look at that before. It might be okay, but it's difficult for me without knowing all the facts. So do pick it up with your contract manager. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it doesn't make any difference. But yeah, so you might have to declare that as a subcontractor, but just yeah, just pick it up with your case manager. Yeah, subcontracting is always difficult. They are looking at the rules though. They are looking at trying to try and improve the rules and take into account those sort of cases whereby people are having to use um, subject matter experts as part of the whole standard, and they're pulling in tutors and stuff that are doing very little, but they need to use them. And because they're not on APAR, they're not necessarily have gone through that register process. So they are looking to change things because they're recognizing this is becoming a big issue. But just please do check yours, please. Yeah. Okay, I'm just conscious it's now gone. Oh, oh no, actually, I think we've got to 12:30, haven't we? So I think I've sped through that. I can't remember what time we said
Yeah,
we
we
finished
have,
this,
Helen. No,
Liv.
that's fine. That's absolutely fine. No, it's just an opportunity. If anybody does have any additional questions, raise your hand and we can come to you direct, or pop them in the chat.
Yeah, yeah.
Or are you all questioned and answered out?
Yeah, I think there's some questions that probably need to be raised with their contract managers, just to double check that they're compliant. Inspect of subcontracting. I would just recommend just to do that to make sure everything's okay. And you can
Yeah,
fight your case
yeah.
then as
And that's
well
exactly
on
it,
that.
Helen, isn't it? If they put them through the contract manager and get the definitive answer, and then at least
Yeah,
it's stepping in there early and getting things at a level playing field for going forward rather than having to unravel anything retrospectively.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd rather, the investment is made now than when we come to audit. Because at least when you've got your answer and then you are audited, you can say, yeah, I checked, got this checked, and it's all fine. But rather, because if we come out and audit and say it's wrong, then the impact is just not nice at all. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
If it's part of your standards, part of your apprenticeship delivery, then it's potentially subcontracting. Yeah. But I think it's just you need to put your case forward why you think it's not subcontracting, and speak to your case manager.
Yeah. Thanks for
Yeah.
that, Helen. Really, really useful session. And I expect everybody will have got a lot out of that, not only from the guidance that's been included, but also from the anecdotal stuff that you've added in there as well. So thank you again for that. Um, in respect of the slides and also the link to our YouTube channel, we will be providing those. Now, I will say within the week, but it might be, it might slip a little bit, but you will definitely receive those within the next week or so, I will say. So thank you again, everybody, for attending. Hope you did find that useful. We'll give you some time back. Grab a cuppa and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yeah.
See you
Thanks. Yeah.
later. Thank you. Thanks,
Thanks.
Helen. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.